Welcome to Athlon U. My name is Braden Gall, and I did not walk on to this podcast.
And I'm Stephen Lassen, but I probably did walk on to this podcast. And you can also follow me at Athlon Stephen on Twitter, Stephen L. CFB on Facebook and Instagram. Read all my work up at athlonsports.com.
You definitely did walk on, but you've earned You earned a scholarship very quickly. So we brought you. We put you on the payroll fast.
I was going to say probably I was looking around the room and you were looking around the room and there was no one else. And you were like, that guy seems to like college football, so pick him. So
That is not how this
um,
happened. That's not how this happened.
hey,
But
Braden,
it's great to have you.
I did want to ask you a question before we get started. So a couple like Fridays ago, did you hear somebody scream like really loud out in Nashville?
No, is this
Okay.
is this you? Is this you?
Yes, it was me. Finished the magazine. After a long night of no sleep, we did finish the magazine
There,
recently.
there was a strange guy driving up and down the street though with Dixon County tags and no clothes on. I was like, "What is that guy doing in my neighborhood?"
Uh, I was clothed, probably in like, my Steelers attire, but, that
Are
was
you
not.
su are you sure? I think, look, finishing the magazine and putting the magazine to bed is absolutely an occasion to take off one's pants. I'm just saying.
What if one is wearing shorts? Like he
Same.
is okay.
Short pants. Celebrating putting the magazine to bed is a big occasion every year,
Yes,
and
it is.
if there's ever an occasion to remove one's pants, I think it's finishing the magazine. So there you go. There you go.
I celebrated by taking a nap. That's what I did. So,
Attaboy,
yeah.
attaboy. Next week on the show, and make sure you're watching on YouTube, of course, the Athlon Sports YouTube page, thumbs up, notifications turned on, and next week, we will be breaking down our official preseason magazine, officially official 2025 top 25. You and I got started working on the top 25s in 2007, correct? And we picked the Florida Gators to win the national championship in 2007. Or no, was it 8? Was it '08 we picked the Florida Gators to win the national championship? And we were the only team, we were the only magazine, the only preseason prognosticators to pick Tim Tebow and the Florida Gators to win that natty. And '07 was the craziest. What a fascinating year
Yeah.
for both of us to get started at Athlon Sports. But we've been doing top 25s ever since. And the magazine will be on newsstands when, Stephen?
May 23rd. So it is coming
Ooh.
up fast. As always, the caveat that some places will get it perhaps a day or two earlier. Some places will get it a little later. I will also say, and not to just, put a panic out there for anybody, but if you do want the magazine, I really would encourage everybody to order it through athlonsports.com. Right on the top of our website, there is a magazine link. You click on that, takes you to our store. I say this because last year, our covers for college football sold quickly. So if you want a specific cover, I would encourage you to order it very early through athlonsports.com.
There you have it. Magazines coming soon to newsstands near you. Our top 25 podcast officially official next week. So today we are discussing some of the most difficult decisions we had to make, some of the biggest arguments, some of the most difficult teams, and some of the more interesting races that we had to discuss throughout the course of the decision-making process. So again, notifications turned on YouTube, and write us a review on whatever podcast app you are listening to us on. We would appreciate it. It allows people to find us and to become a part of the community. We do appreciate all you guys. We know a lot of you have been with us for over 10 years, back when Stephen was a walk-on.
Back in
There were other people taking up scholarship slots on the roster, and so we've since removed those scholarships and given it to you. So there you go.
and you and I, to dust off the archives, did the college fantasy podcast like back in the day,
That
and
was
I think
right.
it's probably like buried in the archive somewhere, and that they removed our scholarships probably because we gave out bad advice or something.
Well, just hopefully those stay buried. That's fine. I just don't want
Right.
them to see the light of
Yeah.
day. So here's the deal. We know there's things going on with the House settlement. We know there's things going on with, all this, the expanded playoff potentially, and we're going to do some episodes around all that content as the dust settles. I'm really, really exhausted with Congress being involved in college football, but I want to talk ball today, Stephen. I want to pick your brain about the most difficult decisions we had. I want to focus on ball. No more legal lawsuits and lawyers and Supreme Court justices and court rulings. And I know there's some important stuff happening. We'll get to all of that, but I want to focus on ball today. So if you're cool with that, let's get started.
I am 100% on board with that. I cannot tell you how exhausted I have been this offseason or reading up on all the latest in the house settlements, eligibility rules. So, honestly, just getting to some ball this season, you and I have talked about this before that despite all the chaos in the background sometimes, it's just nice when Saturday gets here because you forget about all of it. So, yeah, let's talk some ball. Let's have some fun.
All right, let's do it. So we're gonna try not to give anything away for the preseason top 25 episode next week, where we explain every single thing in detail what's going on. But I want to discuss. I love doing this episode where we sort of get into this was the debate. These were the three teams for this spot, or these were the championship contenders in this league. It used to be division contenders. Like here's the race for the SEC West. Here's the race for the Big Ten Leaders Division. Here's the race for the ACC Coastal, and like none of that's a thing anymore. Um, Big 12 North and South. Remember those days?
Don't you
remember,
don't you
remember those
miss
days?
divisions to some extent when
No,
it comes to
no.
predictions? I miss them when I do predictions. I don't necessarily miss them when it comes to scheduling, to be honest with you.
Honestly, I don't. I don't miss them for any reason at all because
Mm.
they were arbitrarily created. I know you want to do. You want easier predictions.
Yes, yes, it would make my life like 10% easier. Yes.
This is why you weren't on scholarship. You're trying to find the easy way out. You're always trying to take shortcuts, Steven.
Right.
All right, let me ask you this then before because we did our group of 5 road trip last week. I hope you appreciate that. We're going to do our national dream road trip coming up in the summer like we always do. But I'm at the very end. I sort of asked you a question. I said, "Look," and for those that didn't stick all the way to the end, I basically said Boise State versus the Field on the New Year's Six Bowl, or I guess it's playoff spot now. Wow, listen to me talk. 1 year of the playoff, and I've already forgotten. And you kind of went. You were like, "Oh, maybe so and so. Maybe it's Tulane. Maybe you kind of maybe it's James Madison." And eventually, when I said Boise State or the Field, you still said you might take Boise State.
Mhm.
So there's not a whole lot of debate, it doesn't seem like, in terms of which group of 5 teams, because I want to give some red meat, some top 25
Okay.
red meat to the people. We're going to give away a couple of things here on the front end, and then we'll get into the debates. It sounds like it would. I mean, it sounds like there's no other real team in consideration to make the playoff from the G5 than Boise State, in your opinion.
I think let me. I guess maybe I should soften my language here. I think Boise State is the clear front runner. Obviously, they have the 2 games, South Florida and Notre Dame. They lose Ashton Genty. I still think they are head and shoulders above everybody in the Mountain West. That being said, I think this is the tricky part about predicting in the transfer portal era. I think we both believe in John Summerall at Tulane. I think the challenge with the American is there's like 6 teams that could make a legitimate case to be the top team. And you start sort of get into that conversation of, okay, if there's 6 pretty good teams, they probably all beat up on each other. Uh, I would be surprised if Conference USA, the MAC, has a team that's going to be able to get high enough in the rankings. And then you get to the Sun Belt, feels pretty open. I mean, I mentioned, I think James Madison's probably the early front runner by most. So by that process, Boise State probably going to run the table in the Mountain West. If you think they beat South Florida, they're pretty much in pole position. With the caveat that if somebody emerges out of the American, they're a pretty legitimate contender, also, if that makes sense.
Well, and Tulane's not even playing just a hard schedule in the conference. You did mention the Notre Dame and the South Florida games. So it's not like Boise State is not going to play tough games in the non-conference, but Tulane's playing what at Ole Miss and Duke, and like they're intentionally scheduling very difficult games out of conference. It's kind of the way they've always been, even under Willie Fritz previously. They're not doing themselves any favors if you got to get to 12-1 if you want to make the college football playoff out of the group of 5.
Yeah, I mean, you could also look at it as those are huge opportunities. Like if they could win one of those games and you're still looking at like 2 losses, you're still in the conversation of getting that toss spot. Like, depending what happens to Boise. I mean, if Boise loses to South Florida, if they lose to Notre Dame, if they stumble once surprisingly in the Mountain West, and I know we'll talk a little bit more specifically about what's going on in the Mountain West, but you could look at all those teams. Like UNLV lost pretty much everybody from last year's team. Fresno, San Jose State, Colorado State. There's just a big gap in the Mountain West to Boise to the second team, and you know, not really giving anything away. I think it's probably UNLV in my mind for that second spot.
So basically, we're saying Boise State loses to Notre Dame, Tulane loses to Ole Miss on the road, correct? I think it's on the road.
Yeah.
and then they both have another tricky game on South Florida on the road for Boise, and then Duke at home. Duke's is probably an upper half ACC team this year with Tulane's former quarterback, mind you. And so basically what you're saying is they both are going to have a loss in the non-conference. Let's just say hypothetically, and then the rest of the way they can lose a game in conference. And if that happens, we could have a 2-loss G5 champion get in.
Yes, I would agree with that. Liberty, they did this 2 years ago when they went to the Fiesta Bowl. The challenge is Conference USA is just, I think, the strength of schedule within the conference is pretty weak. Now they do play James Madison in non-conference play, but there's no power conference opponent. So to your point, if you're Boise, if you're Tulane, even, and I'll throw Navy in that discussion too, because I think their schedule sets up pretty favorably, even if they lose to Notre Dame. That's just the strength of schedule when it comes to a Liberty or pick your team in the MAC. It's really hard to see them being able to be picked ahead of a 2-loss Boise team or a 2-loss team from the American, I think.
Yeah. Okay. I just wanted to clarify that because I know we got to that very, very late in the episode last week, so I wanted to throw that out there.
Do
Okay.
you agree though? Do you think it's Boise and like the champion of the American?
I mean, that's the favorites. I generally think that we are, because we miss on a lot of P5 teams or P4 teams, I should say.
Yeah.
And I remember this time last year we did this episode, and I was like, all right, we did our top 25. Here are the 12 teams that are making it. And I remember saying to you, pick half of them that are not going to make it. And sure enough, half of them didn't make it. And I'm curious, like, I think there's the same amount of difficulty in projecting the G5. Ironically, that didn't happen last year. So we'll see. I want to say, I think Boise was our highest rated G5 team last year, were they not?
I think it was actually Liberty and then Boise.
Was it Liberty?
Yeah, it was Liberty had the pretty favorable schedule.
So there
and
you
they had
go.
everybody coming back. So I mean, yeah, that's a good.
It's very hard to predict, is what I'm getting at, and because you have 40 or 50 or 60 teams or whatever it is, and they're all playing different schedules in different leagues, and it's really hard to pick the one out of 50 that's going to get there. It's hard enough to get 12 or 8 or 9 or 10 out of 12 when you have just Power 4 leagues. It's hard enough to predict who's going to make the playoffs.
Well, and also, I've mentioned this a couple times. The G5 teams are just decimated by the portal every year. You can go up down the all conference team and see like, oh, he's returning, but he's transferred. So all of these leagues have been hit hard. Let me just throw a little kind of sidebar here on Navy. Let me read you their schedule: VMI, UAB, Tulsa, Rice, Air Force at home, at Temple, Florida Atlantic, at North Texas. Talk about a contrast in styles there. At Notre Dame, South Florida, at Memphis. And remember, the Army game is not until December 13th. I think Navy's pretty legitimate. Yeah.
It's a 1-game schedule. But again, if you go, and in their case, it wouldn't even be 11-1. It would be 10-1 going into the AAC championship game. What does that do to their resume and their standing in the rankings? It's going to be fascinating to watch. I just think it's, I think if you told me Boise State, Tulane, JMU, and maybe one other one, you gave me 4 teams. Maybe Navy's the one you're talking about. If you give me those 4 teams, I would feel comfortable saying it's one of those 4. But I don't think it's as clear cut as, Boise State's number 20 in the country and nobody else is a top 50 team or whatever. And I'm not saying that's what we've got ranked. I'm just saying in general, the gap is not as big as I think people expect it to be. And maybe our conversation last week led everyone to think, at least. That's what I'm saying. That's where I'm at on that.
So. I would probably put about a 15 spot gap between Boise maybe in the next G5 team right now in the 136.
Look at you giving away some red meat. All right. What was the toughest conference? I have some I can make different cases for all these leagues. So what was the toughest conference Power 4 and what was the easiest conference Power 4 to select? I have my answer and I don't want to I have the easiest one.
Braden, you know me. I'm up at night sweating who's going to be picked 16th in the ACC. None of these are easy at all, but I thought the Big 12 was probably the hardest. And I think you're going to get a wide opinion and variance on some of these teams that are picked in the top 8 or so. I think some people are going to pick somebody second and they could be picked 8th by somebody else. And that's not a knock on either one. They're probably both top 30 teams. I think, the ACC might have been my easiest one simply because I think the favorite is pretty clear. I think you could debate a favorite in probably all the other power conferences. Do you
I,
agree with
I,
that?
I completely agree. Big 12 hardest, and all ACC easiest, and then the other three are kind of equally hard. Big 12 hardest because I think it's the most unpredictable, truly. Whereas the other leagues, I think there's sort of like a different reason why the Big 10 is so hard to pick. His name's James Franklin. And then and then there's another reason why the SEC to me is so hard to pick is because there's like 4 or 5 or 6 legitimate championship contenders, and they're all kind of similar. Like they're close enough. That's not necessarily like I think the Big 10 has maybe 3 or 4. So there's still a lot of good teams at the top that could contend for a championship, maybe 3. And the ACC, I think it's 1, and then I think there's a pretty big gap between 1 and everybody else. It's not to say that one of those other teams isn't capable of getting into the championship game and winning that game. Absolutely, they can. That's not what I'm arguing. I just think that if you're talking about preseason picks and prognostication, I think the gap between 1 and 2 is far greater in the ACC, in my opinion, than any other league.
I would agree with that. I think there's a chance there is a second playoff team from the ACC, and we can talk about this next week. I wouldn't say I have a ton of confidence in making that prediction, but I think you could also start looking around saying, does the Big 12 have two teams capable of getting there to 10-2 because they're probably going to beat up on each other?
Yeah.
Does the SEC beat up on itself too? Because I think that's a pretty strong possibility. You mentioned Michigan. I think Michigan's got a pretty favorable path this year. Obviously the Sharon Moore suspension against Nebraska, not ideal. That non-conference game against Oklahoma, that's pretty big early. They're at USC, but they get Washington and Ohio State at home. They don't play Penn State. They don't play Oregon. They don't play Iowa. So I think Michigan's an interest. I would not be surprised to see Michigan get some sleeper consideration to make the playoff this year.
Well, let's start in the ACC then, because I think I think there's a couple of different debates here that we had, which is number one, who is going to challenge Clemson? Yeah, I'll just give that part away here. There's your red meat. I think there's a chance that Clemson is the number 1 team in the nation. How about that? How about that to start the conversation? I'm not saying that we're going to pick that or that I'm picking that or that you would pick that. But I would not be surprised if Clemson is number 1 in the nation multiple times this year and isn't the 1 seed going into the tournament. Wouldn't be surprised. I'm not
I,
saying they're going to win the whole thing, but I wouldn't be surprised.
yeah, I would not be surprised either, because if they beat LSU in the season opener, at Georgia Tech could be tricky. They get SMU. They're at Louisville. They're at South Carolina. I think you could reasonably see them getting to 12-1 at the end of the year, where maybe like Texas, Ohio State, Penn State, they kind of beat up on each other, and you're sitting there going, "Yeah, Clemson's won. They've got the big win over LSU.
Yeah.
They have a 1 in the loss column maybe instead of 2." So I could totally see that.
How about this? On paper going into the season, before you do the whole path to the championship thing like you just did, like we did with the G5, could you not make the case that Clemson's the best roster in America?
Not a ton of questions, that's for sure. I think we'll start on the. If you want to start with just right with the optimism, it's Cade Klubnik getting better in his third year as the starter, essentially. The receivers, which were a question you and I had last year, much better last year. I think they're a top 10 receiving core. I also like the fact they hired Tom Allen as defensive coordinator. Their defense has regressed a bit since Brent Venables went to Oklahoma. So I think getting him there can only improve the defense. I mean, this roster, 14 returning starters. Like I said, not a ton of questions. I think if your biggest question is perhaps, well, there's maybe not a lot of depth here, or we're converting a wide receiver to running back and asking a really talented true freshman to play running back snaps. That's a pretty good team. So Clemson's in great shape going into the season.
How many I couldn't have said it better myself. I just really like this Clemson team. I think there's like a final act for Dabo Swinney coming for some reason. And I don't know why I think that way, but I feel very strongly about this Clemson team being like top 2 or 3 in my rankings probably. Who else was even considered for the ACC championship game? Is it 3 teams for 2 spots? Is it 5 teams for 2 spots? How many total teams were in consideration, in your opinion, for the ACC championship game?
I would go with 4. we'll
Okay.
start. Let's start with the sleepers because I think there's two teams that are going to be the consensus favorites, probably behind Clemson in some order. I like Louisville and Georgia Tech as interesting sleeper teams. I think if Miller Moss hits a quarterback for Louisville, they're going to score a ton of points. They brought in some transfers to help on defense. I think Jeff Brom could put together a pretty potent offense. Georgia Tech is also very interesting to me. Their schedule is, it's
Tough.
tricky, but
Yeah.
it's also kind of manageable. And I think we've seen, Brent Key's teams, they can punch above their weight a little bit. Like we mentioned, they get Clemson at home early in the season, the interesting game at Colorado. They do not play SMU. They do not play Miami in the regular season, and they don't play Louisville. So it would not shock me at all if Georgia Tech is with Haynes King coming back and sort of the way that program has been trending, if they could surprise and get to the ACC championship game. The other two teams, it won't be a surprise. It's the two teams that were right there last year, SMU, who fell just short of beating Clemson, and Miami. Miami is going to be an interesting team to debate this offseason because I think looking at what they've done, they are probably a little bit more of a complete team going into the season. They're going to be better on defense. They're probably going to be a little bit more likely to run the ball, probably be a little less dependent on the quarterback. SMU lost a ton. I don't think they're going to sneak up on anybody this year, but they do bring back Kevin Jennings. And I think they've done a nice job in the portal the last couple of years, bringing in some talent. So uh, those four seem pretty set to me. I think if you're reaching into that next tier, maybe Duke, if Darian Minsa hits, that would be kind of my gap, I think.
So it's 5 teams for 2 spots is what you're saying, including Clemson. It's 5 teams for 2 spots in the
Yeah.
ACC championship game. I agree. That's where I drew the line as well. I think the debate is Georgia Tech versus Louisville versus SMU versus Miami. That's the debate.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you can make, or you guys know how much I love my Jackets. I'm fair. They are my Cyclones and my Hoosiers of this year potentially. So I'm very high on Georgia Tech. I think Georgia Tech. If you told me it was Clemson, Georgia Tech in the ACC championship game as our prediction in the magazine, I got no problem with that. I think Miami. You talk about being a more complete team. The question is, does the quarterback have 2 arms? Always an important factor when playing quarterback. I still have major questions about the coaching staff and their ability to win, help the team overcome some of their deficiencies, which every coach has to do. Sustainability at SMU is a major question. And I totally trust Jeff Brom. I think he's a guy that, when we do our coaching rankings pod, I'll be fascinated to see where Jeff Brom lands because I think he's definitely outside the top 10 right now, probably outside the top 15. But I bet you by the end of the year, he could be a top 10 coach in college football, especially some of the guys that are under a lot of pressure. James Franklin, Brian Kelly, Kalen DeBoer, fall flat on their faces. So
Here's a side question for you about the ACC. What would you do with Bill Belichick in the coach rankings? I honestly,
I think that's an exercise and a philosophical question about process, not about
yeah.
evaluation. Because it's actually a very cut and dry evaluation. Greatest coach of all time in the NFL, possibly 0 days coaching in college football. So we can't argue the facts of the resume.
Right.
It's more about how do you view, are you a lifetime achievement guy that looks at Kyle Whittingham and says he's one of the top 3 coaches in America, Dabo Swinney, top 3 coach in America, or is it, hey, I think this guy's really great at X's and O's and he's on the uprise because he's a great recruit, like Dan Lanning or Marcus Freeman, right? You can project who you would take today versus career achievement. And if it's career achievement and resume, then Belichick's very high on the rankings. Has to be very high on the rankings. If it's more about who'd you hire today, I don't want to hire a 24-year-old influencer, Baghdad Bill.
On Louisville, I do think they have a pretty interesting case. I think to be I know kind of cliche a playoff sleeper. Pretty favorable non-conference schedule. Obviously, they get Kentucky at the end of the year. James Madison in week 2, Friday night game. That should be fun. At Pitt, at Miami, hosting Clemson, at SMU. Pretty manageable. Like we talked about, if Miller Moss hits, this offense is going to be really, really good. Once again, got to be a little bit better on defense, but I think you kind of trust Brom to sort of figure this out.
Here's kind of my ACC hot take, and you have to wait to see what the magazine says next week. I think there's one playoff team in the ACC. In part because I like all those other 4 teams that are competing with Clemson. Here's the other part. We talked about the middle of the league when we did our ACC road trip and how really healthy the middle of this conference is. If you add Duke and Pittsburgh and Florida State and North Carolina and Virginia Tech and Syracuse and Boston College and NC State and all these teams into that group with Louisville and Georgia Tech and say which one of these teams jumps up to the top tier with Clemson, I guess you've got to include SMU and Miami in there. If you told me it was like, all right, I'm going to go with Pittsburgh and Virginia Tech, I'd be like, okay. If you told me it was Syracuse and Florida State, I might be a little more surprised, but I might go, okay. So I think there's 1 or 2 of these teams is going to jump up and become a 9 or 10 win team, the way Syracuse did last year, the way SMU did last year. And I just think it's an extremely healthy middle of the league, but I don't know if any of them are good enough to be an 11-1, 12-0 type team that gets to the ACC championship game and in a playoff game. I don't know which one that is. I'm leaning Georgia Tech, but I'm not sure I'd have another ACC team in the top 15, to be honest with you, in my personal rankings.
I would have Miami.
Shush! Stop giving it away. Shush.
Well, not giving anything away on Miami, but I think one of the debates that I had while putting together the rankings is they've got the 2 big non-conference games, Notre Dame and Florida. It's almost like if you could split those 2, your path in the ACC is Louisville comes to Miami. You don't play Clemson. You're at SMU. You get Syracuse at home. You play Pitt later in the year. That's been kind of problematic for Miami at times when they've been in the top 10 or so. So it's definitely banking on talent. When you recruit, 3 or 4 years of the ACC's best recruiting class and you load up in the portal, I could see why Miami's going to get some preseason top 12 consideration.
I've also seen people with them outside the top 20. So
Yeah.
I think Miami's going to be a very divisive team, I think, in the preseason. And again, if you have the championship game is Clemson Louisville, no problems. Clemson SMU, nope. I don't know about that. Clemson Miami, no problem. Clemson Georgia Tech, love it. Love it. Love it.
I would agree with you on SMU. I think it's going to be hard to run it back, especially when you play Clemson in the regular season. I don't think they're going anywhere. I just think it's going to be hard to run that double-digit win season playoff appearance back.
If you had to pick like NC State, North Carolina, Virginia Tech, Syracuse, Boston College, Duke, Pittsburgh, Florida State, the teams we didn't mention, and I'm not talking about the very bottom of the league necessarily, like the Virginia, Stanford, Cal, Wake Forest tier. Give me a couple of teams that were the hardest to figure out, and maybe why you like or don't like one of those teams. Give me one you really love, and give me one you don't like.
Yeah, I'll start with Pittsburgh. Started 7-0 last season, had a bunch of injuries, including to Eli Holston, their starting quarterback, and they lost 6 straight to end the year. I think there's a chance that with Holston back at quarterback, Desmond Reed, who's really a fun all-purpose running back, they've got one of the better linebacker groups in the country. Wouldn't shock me if maybe we're, I wouldn't say underrating Pittsburgh here, but maybe they are a little bit closer to that sleeper tier that we've discussed. I think North Carolina will be picked probably in the top
6,
10 of the ACC or so.
Oh, okay.
I mean,
do you think it's because is it the Belichick effect that they're going to get credit for it? Is that what you're?
Yeah. I think there's. We talked about their schedule on last week's episode. It is really favorable. Now that doesn't mean they couldn't lose at Cal, at Syracuse, or something. But I just look at this roster and I go, Gio Lopez was a big get because this roster doesn't look that great to me on paper coming into this year. So there's a lot of questions, I think, with North Carolina.
I tend to agree as well. I'd keep an eye on Syracuse. I know they're going to be. I don't know where they're going to be ranked in the final rankings, but I'd keep an eye on Syracuse. I just like what Fran Brown's doing. All right, let's go to the most unpredictable. Oh, you got any more? You want to?
Oh, I was just going to mention on Syracuse schedule. Tennessee, Clemson, SMU, Pitt, Georgia Tech, North Carolina, Miami, Notre Dame, BC. That's pretty darn difficult for Syracuse.
Well, and it's the age-old debate. Like I think you're a really good team on paper, but your schedule, like we're going to get to this with Oklahoma. Like there's teams that could be really good on paper and actually very good football teams and end up in like the 8-4 range because their schedules are just so hard that they're not playoff teams.
Yeah.
And so we shall see. All right, Big 12 here. All right, look, I have looked all over the internet just to double check our work in the rankings to see what other people think about this. I rarely do this, but I wanted to see. And the variance of all of these different teams, I would say like the top 9 is really fantastic. And it's what we've always said about this league since the beginning of its new formation, Big 12 2.0 or 3 is it 3 I think it's 3.0. Big 12 3.0 is how unpredictable on a set week to week, year in year out basis it's going to be to predict these teams. So I've broken these teams up into categories here, okay?
Okay.
And this is how we can go through the debates here. My number one question is sustainability. And the teams that I have bucketed into the sustainability question are Colorado, because they were very close to playing in the Big 12 championship game and then lost all their best players. And I'm not sure if they've built anything other than just glitz and glam to sustain. So that's they're number one on the list. BYU, Iowa State, and Arizona State. Obviously, 2 teams played in the Big 12 championship game, one in the playoff last year. BYU, all 3 bring back quarterbacks that were very, very good, but all 3 lose a bunch of pieces around those quarterbacks. BYU, the offensive line, you got the 2-star receivers for Iowa State that are gone. You got obviously Mr. Scadaboo gone for Arizona State, although the receiving core is really good. So I am curious, of those 4, what is the right question to ask about sustainability? Certainly acknowledging that Colorado is bringing back the least of all of those teams.
So I think you nailed it there. Out of that group of 4 teams, Colorado's the one that I would probably give the least amount of chance to get to the Big 12 championship game. I think on paper, and we can debate this, but I think Arizona State probably has the best roster situation going into the season. With Sam Levitt coming back, they got Jordan Tyson. Their defense is also going to be better. I know they're going to miss Cam Scattleboo. Kind of just trust that they'll find some production at running back. And there's another team that we can talk about in a minute that also has a pretty convincing case based upon what they did this offseason. But I think Arizona State by far the most sustainable. I have some questions about BYU and Iowa State, and I think some of that is the Big 12. When you go through last year's results, and in a very broad sense, because rosters are so different now from year to year, it's hard to almost coaches continue to say, and when you read their quotes, they will say it's just about building for this year. It's not like program is important, but it is about this year. And
Yeah.
so, and I look at like last year's data and I'm parsing through close games. I'm thinking, this matters, but how much compared to the past does it matter? But I do think one of the things that continually shows up in the Big 12, when you go down every team, it's like they won 4 games by 1 score. They won 5, they won 6. That is not sustainable to do that. So the breaks in this league are going to go different ways. You mentioned BYU. Did anybody forget last year they needed that crazy ending to beat Oklahoma State, the worst team in the league, and the pass interference call against Utah? I mean,
They had a lot of things go their way in the Final 5, for sure.
yes, the margins in this league are just tiny. And I'm not picking on BYU. You could pick another team in there too. But to somebody in this league is probably easily going to exceed our preseason expectations. I have 2 candidates in mind, but close games and how you win them are going to matter a lot in this league.
I find Iowa State to be the most trustworthy from a stability standpoint. I think Matt Campbell is the most proven long-term high-end coach of this group. Kalani Sitake is certainly in that conversation as well. He's been there a long time, and they bring back a kind of a similar type of roster that Iowa State does. I think Iowa State's the one I like the most out of this group because of the sustainability. I think Sam Levitt could be very, very good, especially with Dyson. I think they could have a really dynamic offense. Kenny Dillingham appears to be a rising star. He appears to be doing things in a very modern and forward-thinking way. He's very entertaining and enjoyable. But if you're looking for like the level, like keep it level, keep it sustainable, and just keep it at the same sort of just never too high, too low, it feels like Matt Campbell is the definition of like steady and stability. And honestly, I would argue, I think the debate here, I think all 4 of those teams are not in the Big 12 championship game. Like if you had, I think there's a good chance we have 2 new teams in the Big 12 championship game than we did last year. I think that's a very real and very normal every year thing we could say about the Big 12.
That would not surprise me. I think this league is going to be a cluster. It's going to be fun as heck to figure out during the season. Couple thoughts on Iowa State, and we may or may not have them in our top 25. So I'll just go ahead and just empty a little bit of data here. So I think one of the
I'll be very upset if you don't, Stephen Lassen. I'm gonna be very bummed.
are you going to walk off the set next week? um,
I'm gonna go into the podcast portal.
Make a podcast portal, right? I think it's actually closed. So if you're a
No,
graduate
no,
portal,
no, no. You know media in 2025, it's never closed.
right, right.
Media portal.
Iowa State starts. We talked about the season showdown in Ireland with Kansas State, a fascinating early season game with major implications. They do get BYU, Arizona State, and Kansas State at home in later in the season, second half.
Kansas State?
Sorry, Kansas,
Yeah, there
November
you go.
22nd. I bring this up because I think one of the underrated parts about Iowa State last year is they were actually kind of bad on defense. I mean, 6.1 yards per play allowed in conference games. Now, they had about a
Relative to their standards, yeah.
relative to their standards, they also had about a million linebackers get hurt, which probably played some role in that.
It's a
But
record.
yeah, the two receivers are gone, and Rocco Beck, of course, is back. But I bring that up their schedule because they turn over secondary. They have some losses up front as well. But by November, late October, to your point, if you're Mac, I think if you're banking on a team kind of getting better as the season progresses, I like the fact they get those games at home later in the year. That could spell good things for Iowa State with all the new faces. By then, you're in much better shape.
Well, and part of those numbers on defense, they gave up a bunch of points in yards to Arizona State in the championship game. They gave up a bunch of points in yards to Kansas in a road loss, which was sort of like the beginning of Kansas's resurgence towards the end of the season, as Jalen Daniels started to figure things out and Kansas started to figure things out. They lost to Texas Tech, and I'm about to ask you a question about all of those teams. We've already talked to Arizona State, but I think Kansas and Texas Tech are major players in the Big 12 championship race this year for sure. And so you just have like every game is a meaningful, crazy, bizarre 50-50 game. And so if you're looking at those four, I think Colorado has the worst quote unquote roster. And I'm not sure how much I trust the coaching staff. I trust Arizona State's roster, but I trust Iowa State's coaching staff. And they do bring back Rocco Becht. And of course, third-year starter, big deal there. And similar, but like Iowa State light is BYU, which is, again, quarterback coming back, stable coaching staff, etc. Here's the next category, the bounce back category. Utah, Kansas, Oklahoma State. All three hugely disappointing seasons last year. All three, in my opinion, will be better this year. How much better? Unsure. Totally unsure.
I hate to be boring and just say, yeah, that's about right. But yeah, it is. I mean, Oklahoma State was just it's puzzling to figure out how they went 3-9 and 0-9 last year. I did not like necessarily what they did early on in the portal. I think they did a little bit better job in the spring. Doug Meacham, Todd Grantham as the new coordinators. Okay, they've been around for
Yeah.
a while. This feels like they're going to be better for sure, but 6 wins, 7 might be their ceiling. The other teams, you mentioned Utah and Kansas. I think they are contenders to get to the Big 12 championship game.
Yeah.
I think Kyle Whittingham will not have a team that goes 2-7 in the Big 12 again. There are questions. How does Dan Pierre, the new quarterback, transfer from New Mexico? How good is he as a passer? Their offensive line, pretty much everybody's 5 starters are back. They've got a lot back on defense too. So I like this Utah team. I could convince myself they could get to the Big 12 championship game. Same thing for Kansas, especially with Jalen Daniels back.
And then there's the next group. I totally agree with everything you're saying. So very boring section of the Big 12 conversation there. But I do think I think the debate is how much better is Utah? How much better is Kansas? I trust both of them for different reasons. I like both of the coaching staffs. I like the talent on the line of scrimmage for Utah. I like the talent at quarterback in particular. I think he's going to bounce back and have a better season at Kansas and Daniels. The next group of teams is sort of who takes the next step? Baylor, they find a quarterback. TCU, they find a quarterback. Texas Tech, they find their footing last year with some talent and the quarterback. Obviously, Kansas State has their star quarterback. So the question of those four is they all took some small steps last year. or in Kansas State's case, they kind of stayed where they are. But like those programs all found some things, and they all look very, very cheeky this year. They look very cagey. Like the debate is how much do you believe in which one of these programs can take the next step into the next tier? And if you told me again, this was a Utah Kansas State championship game, would not be surprised. If you told me it was Texas Tech Arizona State, would not be surprised. If you told me it was Kansas BYU, I might be a little surprised,
Yeah.
but totally doable. Totally a thing that could happen. BYU and Kansas, which is a crazy Big 12 championship game to think about.
I will say on BYU, I'm probably and I've looked at some early top 25s. So once we finished the magazine and some have been out there, little surprised to see BYU picked in the top 15, top 20. It's a little high for my taste. We're probably going to be in the lower end of where BYU is in the rankings, but I'm going to put my hand on the burner on Texas Tech, Braden.
Ooh, again. All right.
This team, so they were 6-3 last year in the Big 12. I don't love their schedule on the road at Utah, at Arizona State, at Kansas State, and they also play at West Virginia late in the year, which could be tricky. However, they are significantly better at the line of scrimmage. Now they lose Taj Brooks, who was over 1,000-yard rusher, one of the best in the country last year. They have upgraded at the two coordinator spots. What I am trying to say is they are all in on 2025, and I am going to bank on them being significantly better. Maybe not enough to get to the Big 12 championship game, but I think they will be picked pretty high in my Big 12 predictions this year.
You got teams that were better last year than we expected that we have questions about sustainability. We have teams that were worse last year that we expect to be better this year. And we have teams that took incremental steps to get better that could take bigger steps this year to be even better. It's a fascinating league. And none of that includes a program like Houston, for example, that we think with Willie Fritz is going to be better. They're going to be slow building like he does every single step of his career. The question is, again, how much better? Are they top 5 or 6 in the conference? Are they top 10 in the conference? I'm not sure anyone knows anything about Houston this year either. I just West Virginia, are they going to be that much better running a totally different offense with a new coach? We'll see. So it's just it's wild. It's a wild league, and it's really, really fun to get excited about.
Also, I meant to mention this on Baylor. I love their schedule. Home against Arizona State, home against Kansas State, home against Utah. When we're talking about winning close games and swing matchups, like that's a pretty good path for Baylor. They were also red hot at the end of last season. You mentioned it. They found a quarterback in Sawyer Robertson. They've got potentially an All-American at running back in Bryson Washington. I just think they might have found their footing too under Dave Aranda. Like he kind of took over defensive play calling. They hired Jake Spavital. Like it feels like Baylor kind of turned a corner last year. And on Kansas State too. You and I both like this. Chris Kleiman in his program, just rock solid every year. It would not shock me at all if we are talking about Kansas State Big 12 champ at the end of the year.
Yeah, not surprising at all. I really like Baylor as well. I like Baylor a lot out of that group of teams to take the next step. I'm not yet convinced on Texas Tech, but I understand why you're there. So we'll see. All right, in the Big Ten, there's one major question that you have to answer. And the way I've been processing this in my head is not like that Athlon Sports matters to people that are like out to coaches. Like that Athlon Sports picks and top 25 has any impact on the season. It does not. I'm just trying to say it doesn't have any impact on the season.
Right.
But I think there's a moment where we have to look at the roster and we have to look at Penn State and we have to decide, do we believe in James Franklin to deliver on the potential of the roster? Or are we going to once again go with the team that's unproven but has tons of talent, and Ohio State or Oregon in this case? And I think it is exclusively the debate you have to answer is, are you willing to put your sort of, your rankings on the line here publicly and say, no, Penn State is the best team in the Big Ten on paper, and therefore we need to pick them number one? Or do we still think they're going to do the thing they've done almost every single year that James Franklin's been the coach and lose a game or two they're not supposed to and not get over the Ohio State hump? I think they're 1-12 in their last 13, and the one they won was when they blocked 2 field goals and returned them for touchdowns. They have not beaten Ohio State straight up, period. And it's not that Ohio State's going to be great this year. They could be very good. And they got tons of talent, 5 stars everywhere. Like, I get it. Same story with Oregon. Same exact team, actually. Like Oregon and Ohio State are like the same team. Michigan's going to be better. Illinois is going to come into the season with a lot of talent. There's a chance Nebraska takes a step forward. You've got Iowa, Minnesota, USC, Wisconsin, Washington, all of which could be better this year. It's Minnesota, sneaky good team. There's a lot of hurdles in this season, and I'm not trying to give anything away because I don't have final say on the rankings. You do, but because I don't know specifically whether or not you're going to pick Penn State or Ohio State or Oregon. I have come to the point where I'm going to put Penn State at 1 or 2, probably 2 in my rankings personally, and say
nationally, right?
Nationally,
okay,
at number 1 in the Big Ten, and I'm going to probably say this is the year you're supposed to do it, and if you don't do it, it's on you guys. And maybe that's like too dramatic. I don't know, but it does feel like that's the only question.
So, Penn State versus Ohio State was probably one of my toughest decisions in the magazine this year.
So no Oregon. You're just giving that away. It's not Oregon.
It was not an Oregon debate for me.
Okay. All right.
I think Oregon is very much a playoff contender. I think it is a 2-team discussion at the top. Now,
so give me why you'd pick Penn State, and then give me why you'd pick Ohio State.
Well, I would argue when we get into the schedules, Penn State doesn't actually have to beat Ohio State to win the national championship or the Big Ten because of the way the schedules break down. I mean, they could lose to Ohio State once. Ohio State could lose to Michigan and somebody else, and here we are talking about Penn State playing Michigan or Oregon. So
Ohio State can't beat Michigan ever, and they still win national championships.
Exactly. So I mean, we're just in totally different territory with the 12-team playoff. Yeah. If you want to make the argument for Penn State, I think one of the arguments I always see is, well, it hasn't happened, and at some point it could happen. We had this discussion with Michigan a couple years ago. They can't break through. Well, they did. They broke through. They beat Ohio State. They're now on this winning streak. They won a national title. I think Penn State has all the right ingredients. You know, the experience that Michigan and Ohio State had that translated into national championships. Penn State has that. That doesn't necessarily mean that it will, but they bring back a ton of pieces. I mean, you could argue this is the best backfield. This is the best offensive line. I think they dealt Ohio State a pretty big blow when they took Jim Knowles away from them.
I hear you, but if you read the story on that, it doesn't sound like Ohio State was beating down the doors to keep him. It sounds like he wanted an offer, and they were like, "Meh, we're not sure."
Matt Patricia.
I just want to point that out.
Matt Patricia, Jim Knowles.
I hear you. I'm just saying.
I got you. I think they have upgraded a defensive coordinator. As odd as it is, Tom Allen was good. Jim Knowles is better. I think this is also looking at this offense going, they have addressed the biggest question mark at receiver by bringing in 3 transfers. If Aller takes the next step under Colton Ecke, all the pieces are there. I think they'll be favored in 11 regular season games. If you look at Ohio State, I think the argument is just talent reload. I think Julian Sayin is going to be very good at quarterback. They've obviously got maybe the 2 best players in college football returning in Jeremiah Smith and Caleb Downs. Also, pretty good foundation coming back on the offensive line. They're maybe not as deep as they were last season because of all the losses, but this is also Ohio State, and they're just the next wave of talent is going to emerge in Columbus. They also, I know we kind of laughed about the schedules, they host Penn State, and so that could be a tiebreaker that matters for Big Ten championship and also potentially for how the playoff looks at the end of the year.
The whole will Drew Aller take another step question it feels like it's the same thing we've been asking for a while, and I'm curious if you define last year as a step forward, because he went from 59% completion percentage to 66, clearly a step forward. He went from 6.8 yards per attempt to 8.4, clearly a step forward, both in efficiency, but basically the exact same yards per game passing, which is, paltry in 2025 college football standards. 202 yards, 207 yards, way more interceptions this past year. Now he played more games, but his interception ratio quadrupled last year. I think year 3, just like all these quarterbacks in the Big 12, we're in for a good year for Drew Aller. I think he's a great player. I think he's going to be a top 10 pick in the draft. But I think it's still fair to say, will he take the next step, and how big is that step? I think are fair questions to ask.
It is. I also think Penn State doesn't necessarily need Drew Aller to win the Heisman to win the Big Ten because they're so
Yep.
good everywhere else.
Yep. I
Also,
agree.
I don't. Maybe this is just me, but when I look at their receiving stats from last year and see that Tyler Warren had 104 receptions, and I know their receivers weren't great. I also wonder if they don't have Tyler Warren. They've got some talent coming back at tight end still, but maybe being forced to use the other weapons on offense maybe allows them to grow a little bit offensively, kind of in a strange way. They're going to miss Tyler Warren, but maybe receivers plus using the
Yep.
running backs a little bit more, they become a little different offensively. But I think Aller will be better this season.
So the rest of this, I mean, I think Ohio State, you kind of it's fair to kind of put them in a tier by themselves. I think sustainability is sort of a question for Oregon on one level, and then Illinois and Indiana on a different type of level. Indiana replacing much like Oregon's replacing. Illinois returns a lot, but still has never had the season it had last year, like ever. And so asking them to, it's sort of like Missouri. Remember Missouri 2 years ago? I was like, oh, that's the greatest season basically in regular season Missouri history. It's not fair to ask them to do it again. It feels similar to Illinois as to last year. But I again like all the pieces and see what happens. Progress you expect from Nebraska, you expect from Minnesota, you expect from Michigan State, I expect from maybe Wisconsin even. And then a bounce back, of course, USC, Washington. How much better can they be? I think Michigan is going to take a step forward from last year. They kind of figured things out in the second half of the season last year. A big question there is how much is Sharon Moore's absence? Is it going to be 2 games? Is it going to be 4? How much does that impact the game? I don't think there's any other teams like I mean Iowa's sort of just a team that doesn't really have a category because they're just going to Iowa every year. Like they're just going to be Iowa, and maybe their quarterback this year is better and they have a more dynamic offense, but like they're still just going to be Iowa, which is good, very good. I don't know if it's Big Ten championship good, but it's not like bad at all. So I don't know how to make. I think the top 4 are pretty clear, and then I think you can make a lot of maybe the top 6 are clear. I don't maybe those other 2 I schools are in there.
I would go with that. I would say the top 6 are clear. Like, do you like Indiana or Illinois a little bit more is probably a preseason debate. You know,
Michigan's in that same group.
yeah, Michigan and Oregon, I think it's a Penn State, Ohio State discussion, but I think
Yeah,
Oregon certainly gonna be a top, 10 team. I think Michigan is very interesting with Bryce Underwood plus a favorable schedule. The intrigue for me is if you think Indiana and Illinois are like 5 and 6 in some order, that Nebraska, USC, Iowa, Washington tier of teams is fascinating. I think USC's been on an off-season heater with all their recruiting. They seem to have kind of settled in a little bit under Lincoln Riley. This team's got some potential. Their offense could take off if Maivia at quarterback settles in. I'm not quite sold on their line of scrimmage, which is a problem in the Big Ten. But I think Washington to me is also a team that could be a real problem for others in this league. I mean, Ohio State has to play at Washington early in the season. They also host Illinois and Oregon. Demond Williams at quarterback put on a show in the Sun
yeah.
Bowl. I know it's a bowl game, but he was electric. And if he is that good over 12 games, Washington is going to easily outperform everybody's preseason prediction.
I feel like you're being disrespectful to Michigan State and Minnesota. I don't know how much progress Michigan State can make, but Minnesota doesn't need to make a lot of progress. Like if you take the pandemic year out of this, they have won at least 9 games, 3 of the last 5 seasons. They won 8 last year. They've been to 6 straight bowl games. They've had I mean, this is a program now. It's not just a team. And I think Minnesota, while they're not maybe a top tier Big Ten team, they're going to be in the mix for 8 or 9 wins almost every season. And I think keep an eye on Michigan State and Minnesota. I like those 2 to kind of jump up a little bit. I agree with you on USC, Washington being better this year. I think Nebraska takes a big step forward. So I think it's the middle of all of these leagues. The SEC we're about to talk about, the Big Ten, the Big 12, the ACC, from like 3 to like 10. And this is maybe ultimately one of the biggest impacts of realignment because because they've all like coagulated into these bigger leagues. 3 through 10 is now incredibly balanced in every one of these leagues.
Totally agree. And that's why I was wistful for the days of divisions at the start of our show and wishing for the East and West and
Boo. No, I
legends
like it.
and
I
leaders.
like it.
But
No,
I
it's a
mean,
great
to I think that what you bring up is something that I've wrestled with when we do these predictions. It's like you see a team pick 12th, you're like, are they really the 12th best team in that league? But it's like, well, there's 11 teams that could be picked in the top 30 or so. So it means that they're just right in that discussion too. It's very hard to parse through some of these middle of the conferences, like who you play, who you don't play. You know, if you change a one win or two in your projections, somebody could go from 13th to ninth, and you're talking about a totally different kind of optimism coming into the season.
So I think this is the deepest the SEC's ever been in 2025. There's a chance that there are 10 ranked teams in our preseason top 25. There could be 12 teams that you could consider for like breakout candidate and top tier candidate. I think there are 4 teams on the championship tier, in my opinion. There's a huge question with Florida and DJ Lagway, whether or not he's healthy or not, because if he's healthy, they might be a clear playoff team by some opinion. And if he's not healthy, they're clearly they might fire the coach. Like I know, like it's a wild swing based on one guy's shoulder. Um, I think the middle of this league. I think here's what I think is I've learned, and I think there's a good debate, but I think I've learned there's 4 teams on the top tier. To me, it's LSU, Alabama, Georgia, Texas. Those 4 on the top. Then I think it's a clear South Carolina, Florida, Texas A&M tier. That's the next tier. Then I think there's an Ole Miss, Auburn, Oklahoma, Tennessee tier. And then I think there's the Missouri, Vanderbilt, Arkansas, Kentucky tier, and then there's Mississippi State. But I think like you can make a really strong case for Ole Miss, for Tennessee, for Auburn, for Oklahoma. You can make I think a less strong case for Missouri. Other than schedule, there's not a great case for Missouri. South Carolina and Florida feel like the same team. Like very talented front sevens, struggle running the football with an offensive line, and a superstar quarterback who's could carry the team as far as a playoff spot. Is that a fair way to look at the rest of the league before we get to the debate at the top?
Yeah, it is. This is a insanely deep year in the SEC. I think you said it. 10 teams or so could be a top 25. I would even go as far as say as I would include like anybody that's picked 11 and 12. I mean, they're certainly top 30, 35. They could finish in there. I think it's probably unlikely that all 12 do, but I would assume some power ratings probably have them. So I like the top 4 as you have it. I might tweak the middle a little bit, but we're not that far off. Like this feels like these are all top 25 teams in some order, whether they're 17, 19, 20, however you want to order them.
But South Carolina, Florida are at the top of that middle tier for sure, right?
I would agree with that. South Carolina is one team kind of having a little trouble getting my arms around a little bit this offseason. I don't know if you feel the same way,
Yeah,
but
I do.
I look at their offensive line and go, man, they lost 3 starters. They lost Eamon Worry at safety. They lost pretty much everybody that had a pulse at linebacker last year. Their defensive tackles are decimated. They don't really have a go-to receiver right now. And I'm asking, okay, we're picking them because they have Lenore Sellers, which definitely makes sense. Their schedule is also very difficult in the back half. And, Shane Beamer's teams tend to get better as the season goes along, which helps them. But that's a lot of losses, and it's asking a lot of Sellers.
Yeah,
So
I agree.
definitely doable, though.
If you're asking me Notre Dame or this tier of the SEC based on questions and schedule, I would go Notre Dame
I would too.
over
Yeah.
these teams. So let's get to the top 4. Bama. Here's my quick debate in my head. I think Bama's offense could be more dynamic, more what Kalen DeBoer wants, and better offensive line, better receiving core, better running game around the quarterback. The quarterback is the question, but that's a huge question, obviously. I think the defense is going to be real salty. The secondary is going to be even better. And I think Alabama is absolutely a championship caliber team, national and SEC. I think LSU, this is a very logical next step for Brian Kelly and LSU. You bring the quarterback back. Blake Baker's second year in the defense. They've recruited well on that side of the ball. They've done a better job in state. This is a year where LSU could be the team to beat in the SEC, period, full stop. Georgia, it's completely about belief in Kirby Smart and overall talent. That's what that's about. They did just put 13 players into the draft again, though. So, and their quarterback took a paycheck to go somewhere else. So there's a lot to believe in with Georgia that you have to kind of accept. Texas, on the other hand, $40 million payroll, Steven. I don't know if you saw the reports.
Yeah.
Um, it feels like this is the Ohio State team of this year, and it doesn't mean that they are going to, win the SEC championship. It doesn't mean they're going to make the playoff. It doesn't mean they're the best team. It's hard to look at Texas though and not say, well, I think odds on they're the team to beat. But I think we go to SEC media days, and I think people are picking LSU, Georgia, Texas, and maybe a little bit of Alabama sprinkled in there. Is what I would guess.
I would agree with that. So I have the same top four, and I kind of debated the top four, a lot this offseason. I think you kind of separate those maybe four into two pods of two teams, but I still believe a lot in Georgia to just reload. I know there's a ton of new faces. I thought Gunnar Stockton held up well in the Sugar Bowl against Notre Dame, all things considered. They also have some receivers through the portal that perhaps can catch the ball a little bit better than they did last year. Also, Georgia was 15th in the SEC last year in rushing offense. That is very unlike Georgia. I would suspect that changes this offseason. And of course, we know they're going to be pretty good on defense. Host both Alabama and Texas. On Alabama, I do not have a ton of questions other than quarterback. And I know I've said this a couple times to you, Braden. I actually think they might be a little bit more better off with either Ty Simpson, Austin Mack, or the freshman Keelan Russell. It's not a knock on Jalen Milroe. I just think that one of these quarterbacks might fit their system better. Also, Ryan Grubb coming back to call plays is huge. Just taking that off of DeBoer, Nick Sheridan, that brain trust worked well at Washington. I think it'll work well here again. Love what LSU has done this offseason. They are one of the big offseason winners. Defense has to be better with portal additions and Blake Baker in his second year, and their receiving core plus Nussmeier, they are going to have no trouble putting up points. Texas, I think, they've been pretty much one or two in everybody's preseason poll. And, Arch plus a good defense, to me, they have all the ingredients to be this year's preseason favorite.
I don't think it's two pods. I think it's four teams in one pod. I do think Alabama's the fourth of that group, but I think Georgia, LSU, Texas. I have all four of those teams in the top 8 nationally.
I would as well.
So they're all very high on my list. So I think the real debate to me the debate in the SEC is like, all right, which one of these guys is the best, and if that team is the best, are they number one, and can they win the whole thing? The answer is probably yes if you think they're the best team in the SEC. The question then is who joins them in the playoff race, and I think it's South Carolina, Florida, and then we haven't touched on A&M or Ole Miss, but we got all offseason to do that. But I think I would lean A&M with Florida and South Carolina as the three teams just fighting to try to get into that playoff conversation. But I do think there are flaws with those three teams. So I think there's a great argument with those three. Then I think there's another argument, as I mentioned, with Ole Miss, Tennessee, Auburn, and Oklahoma. I think Oklahoma could be one of the most improved teams in America, but their schedule is brutal, and we still haven't seen it yet with Arbuckle and Mateer. So I don't know. I think it's the deepest I've ever seen this league going into a season. But again, that's going to be the case when the leagues are bigger and have more teams that are high quality programs playing together. So in every league.
Is Oklahoma one of the teams that the stock improved on them the most from the end of the season? Is that fair to ask?
It's weird because they lost Arnold too. Maybe. I mean, I think they're putting all of their eggs. Brent Venables is putting all of his eggs in the Ben Arbuckle, John Mateer basket, and there's a chance it works brilliantly. And if it does, they've got a chance to play huge spoiler, if not fight their way into a 9-win season. But their schedule is so stupid. It's such a stupid schedule.
Michigan at home. There is the internet will explode when Jackson Arnold comes back to Norman on September 20th. October 11th, Texas, of course, in Dallas, at South Carolina, home against Ole Miss, at Tennessee, at Alabama, Missouri, and LSU at home to close the season.
That's like 5 playoff teams plus the top 3 contenders. The only one they miss is Florida.
Yeah,
they play everybody good.
They have to be better on offense just by default. Like there's no possible way they can have that many injuries on offense again this year. So I would bank on them being better. Their schedule gives me a lot of pause though.
Ole Miss, I think, taking a step back. I think Tennessee takes a step back. I think Auburn and Oklahoma take a step forward. But does that mean they're all on the same page? I don't know. I don't know. So we'll see. I think the growth from South Carolina and Florida in the second half of the season in particular, and then A&M, I think all three of those you can bank on continued trajectory. I think that's how I feel about that. And a lot of that's quarterback, established culture, whatever. For
You're
South Carolina, establishing culture for A&M, and just DJ Lagway and the defense for Florida.
Yeah. I Yeah, let me save a bit on Florida for next week because it'll
All right.
it'll help
Okay.
break
All right.
down our top 15 or so. But I will ask you about A&M because I think A&M's a little bit undervalued this offseason. I mean, they might have the best
Agree.
offensive line and backfield in the SEC. It's no shot at Texas. Their backfield is very good too. How good is Marcel Reed? I think is the question. And they also lost 3 studs on the defensive line. Mike Elko is still very angry about his secondary from the Las Vegas Bowl. So road trips to Notre Dame, LSU, Texas, that's tough. They get Florida at home, but in South
I
Carolina at home.
I think they're undervalued. Yeah.
Yeah.
A little bit nationally by most folks, but also same thing, like hand on burner,
Yeah.
fool me once. So I think they're all in really good shape to be very, very, they're all very good football teams. I don't know how good they're all going to be. And I think it's going to be a great debate in the summer. And I think it's going to be a great debate throughout the course of the season. And the one thing we are learning through the realignment and sort of doing all of this is picking swing games in every one of these conferences. There are just 3 or 4 more swing games on your schedule than there used to be when it comes to any of these leagues, all 4 of them. And those are the games that decide these rankings and decide where everybody's going to finish out. So awesome stuff. Can't wait for the top 25 to come out. Athlonsports.com for all your needs on the website, of course, and buy those magazines. Pre-order them now. Pick out the cover you want. Make sure you do that at athlonsports.com. Steven, where can people find you?
You can follow me on Twitter at AthlonSteven, Steven L. CFB, on Facebook and Instagram, also on Blue Sky, athlonsports.com as well.
There you have it. Other than that, turn the notifications on. Check us out on YouTube. Write us a review. Do not give us anything but 5 stars, because if you do not give us a 5-star rating, you are a
5-star hater. Switched it up this week.
Okay. Well, if you give us 5 stars, you're not a hater.
Right.
You can't be a 5-star hater.
Right. If you don't give us
5 stars.
Right. Give us 5 stars so you're not a 5-star hater.
Then you're a hater. That's right. All right. Other than that, thanks for hanging out. Top 25 next week on the show. Cannot wait. Thanks for listening. For Steven, I'm Braden. We'll talk to you next time.